Okay, so we sent off those renderings. If you click on your render gallery button here, that will open your web browser, take you to your renderings. I've already got that open. So here are those two renderings that we sent. So this is actually the second rendering, which was the kind of visualization of the plan with that simulated daylight. And the first one was our daylight factor simulation. And remember, we talked about setting this legend to an appropriate level, and I've set it from 0 to 20%. So the maximum color value that we can see is 20%, dropping down to 0. Now, at this stage in the building, because I happen to know that this building is really quite bright, before we put any shading on it, that's probably about the right kind of legend. Once we add the shading on, if we want to then see a little bit more detail in that daylight factor, then we could rerun the analysis with the legend set perhaps from 0 to 10%. And you can keep changing that. But those are the two images that we've just rendered. And all I've done there in the break was I've clicked on download, downloaded that image, put it onto my hard drive. And what we're going to look at now is how you can put those images onto a sheet, and also how you can overlay your building plan onto those images. Now if I just go back, if we just go in here and look at those, so that's one of the images that we've rendered. Now that's a JPEG that you can download, and for many purposes, for simulation, that is actually perfectly fine. It's giving us a good understanding of the daylight factor. Now what it's not giving us is the kind of detail of our building. So for example, if I zoom in a bit here, the door, we're not getting any of that line work on the door. We don't get things like the symbol for the staircase. What else? The windows, we're not getting any line work, so we're simply getting the daylight property, and because the insides of those windows are dark, they come out blue. Now, that was only quite a low resolution image that I created. Now you might find, for your purposes, for your report, that those JPEG images or bitmap images are perfectly acceptable. If we go into the other one there, the sort of floor plan visualization, then again, as a JPEG, you might find that is perfectly good enough for what you need. I mean, you could render that at much higher detail level. You can see it's a little bit pixelated here because it was only quite a small render. But what you are still getting, however, is quite a subtle light distribution where we get a kind of a very kind of fine gradation of the light qualities in that space. But what we're not getting with this kind of image is, again, any of the line work from Revit. And we'll look at how you can do that. So this is the sheet that we've already set up, and if we zoom in here, we do actually have the real live Revit line work. Now the reason this is also quite useful is if I activate that view, the floor plan, because that is actually live model information, if I move that wall, then it will move live. Now, this also illustrates that the rendering underneath that, the daylight visualization, is currently not live. And in Revit, there's no way at the moment to get that daylight factor as a live element. I'm sure it will come in a year or two, but at the moment, you just have to go through that process of creating the visualization and placing it back in. Ideally, what we'd like is when we move that wall, that the daylight simulation updates itself. But it does not do that yet. And in fact, there aren't, I don't think there really are many softwares out there that will do that for you. But at least here, by having the real building overlaid with your static simulation, it does make it very obvious if you've changed the building that the visualization is no longer up to date. So at least you can't make that mistake of forgetting to update the visualization. If you were to export this sheet, it would be quite obvious that something is wrong here. So I'm just going to undo those two moves that I did there. Okay, and we'll show you now how to get those images in. Right, so first thing we're going to do is let's create a new sheet. And we've looked at this before. Right click on Sheets, New Sheet. I'll just stick with the A1 metric sheet, and let's get rid of that. There's our new blank sheet, and we want to get those simulations onto that sheet. Right. What we're going to do is work a little bit with the drafting views. And drafting views are a kind of two-dimensional views. So they are views in Revit where you're no longer really interested in the three-dimensional model. It's kind of a bit like a piece of paper in a way. And we don't use them very often, but they are useful for certain tasks. So we're going to have a look at how we do that. Okay. Over on the right here, we've got our drafting views in our project browser, and we've actually got a few different views created under there already. But we're going to create a new drafting view. Okay, if I could just remember, there it is. So we go under View, Drafting View, click on that. That was just asking me to save. New drafting view. So let's give it a meaningful name. Level 10, daylight factor, whoops, spring equinox. 1 to 100, we'll leave it at 1 to 100. Okay. So there's our empty drafting view with nothing in it. And what we want to do, first of all, is bring our rendered illuminance, rendered daylight factor image onto that sheet. If we go to Insert, excuse me, Image, Insert Image, and we need to find those images. Let me just find those. So we'll bring in that JPEG. You get the crosshair, which indicates that Revit wants you to place it. So just click to position it. I'm not really worried about where that is. Excuse me. And so there's our daylight factor placed in a drafting view. Okay, just have a check here. Right, so we've got that. WT, Windows tile, I'm just going to tidy up a bit here. So let's drag that drafting view onto our sheet. So go over into our drafting views, get that sheet, drag it onto our sheet and place it. Okay, so there's our drafting view placed on our sheet. That looks too large for me, so I'm just going to immediately change the scale of our drafting view back to 1 to 200, and that will change on the sheet. So we've got that placed on our sheet, but we've not got our building plan placed over the top of it. So let's do that now. Okay. So let's get our building plan and let's get that looking exactly how we want it. So this is the one that we created earlier. So let's open that. There's our view. Now let's just clean this up a little bit. Let's just make it look exactly what we want to see on that sheet. So first thing I'm going to do is switch off the shadows, because these are not the realistic shadows. These are those shadows you get with the kind of view chopped off. So we'll switch those off. We'll activate our crop box, and let's just bring that much closer in to the building. Something like that. Let's just try that. Okay, zoom in a bit. Let's hide some of these section markers, which we don't want. So if we click on that, right click, hide in view elements, we can just hide that. Let's do the same with this one. And let's hide this one as well. Okay, so we've hidden those section markers. And I think we'll probably leave it like that. We've got our room names. We'll try with those room names on. We can always switch them off later if we don't like the look of it. We are in course view. So that's fine. Course, and I think we'll leave it in course view because that looks about right to me. The scale 1 to 50 is quite large. Let's set that to 1 to 200. And you see what happens when we change the scale, because the text doesn't change. So I think what we'll do is we'll get that text and we'll switch it off. We'll hide it in view. So I'm going to drag a bounding box, and as you see, everything that's highlighted in blue has now been selected. Now, I don't want all of those elements. Let's use the filter. Quite a useful tool here, little filter button. Click on that, and what it does, it shows you a list of everything that you've just selected. And you can see we've got curtain walling, doors, floors. Easiest thing is often just check none. So deselect all of that, and then find your room tags, which was here. So those room names they're called room tags. Let's just select those. Okay. So we've now highlighted in blue just got our room tags highlighted. Right click, hide in view elements. Okay. Let's get that little stair marker, and let's hide that in view. Okay. We could have also used the shortcut VV, Visibility Graphics, and we could have equally gone into here, found our stairs, our room tags, annotation categories, scroll down, room tags here. We could have equally just deactivated room tags for the entire view. Okay. So two different ways of achieving the same thing. The thing to bear in mind is we are only changing it in this view. So if I go back to our normal level 10, we've not changed our level 10 view. We've just changed the view that we duplicated. And that's why it's quite handy to duplicate the view so that any changes you make don't change other views that you have created. Okay, so we've got that view. Let's now get that onto our sheet. So Windows Tile. There's our sheet. There's the plan view that we want to get onto it, which is this one here. Click and drag it onto our sheet, and click to position it. You see we're getting a snap. Just about make that out there. There's a little dotted line appeared. It's offering to snap to that left-hand side, which is helpful. So we've positioned that. That looks far too small to me. So let's change that scale up to 1 to 100. Okay. Now, what you might notice there is that our drafting view with the JPEG is set to 1 to 200. Our plan view is set to 1 to 100. Now, the thing here is that, to bear in mind, the JPEG is just pixels. It doesn't really have a size. So, depending on what resolution you rendered it at, when you bring that back into Revit, it doesn't know what size a JPEG should be. You could have set it to 1200 pixels or 800 pixels. So it is a little bit of trial and error that you've simply got to bring it back in and resize it. And as I said earlier, it is just a JPEG. It's a still image at this point. Okay, we've got our two views into our sheet. Let me just zoom in a bit there. So we've got our plan view and we've got our daylight simulation. And we want to put those together, one over the top of the other one. Now, just a few things before we do that to tidy that up. First thing is, if we just overlay them now, both of those views has a title line, and that will be quite confusing to have two titles overlaid over each other. So if we click on our view at the bottom and go into Properties, go up to the top here, we've got some options for those viewports. And you can have no title, title no line with detail ref, title with line. If we just select no title, then we lose the title off that view. We don't need it. Okay, we can always bring it back by selecting the view, changing it back to title with line. But for our purposes, we don't want to see that. So we hide that, and we're pretty much ready to go. Let's drag that top plan, let's put it over our daylight factor. And what you see immediately is it obscures the view below it. Okay, now, a few different ways of dealing with that. You can go into that floor plan and start switching off the floors, switching off the rooms so that you can see through them. I personally find it easier just to switch that view to a wire frame. Click on that view. You can either double click or right click, activate in view. And what that then does is, although we're now in a kind of paper space environment, like in AutoCAD you would call it paper space, a sheet of paper, by activating the view we can edit that view. So we're now live in the model. If I go down to our visual styles here at the bottom, change that to wireframe, we can now see through the plan. Okay. Right click on your view again, deactivate view. You've deactivated that view, we're now back in a sort of paper space environment. Okay. Just have to be slightly careful there, because when you activate that view, you're in the live model. and any changes you make are changes in the model. I have had a few incidents in practice where one member of staff, they activated this view in their sheet, and they said, oh, I don't want to see all of these chairs and tables, so they deleted them. And they were thinking, they were sort of thinking in a 2D AutoCAD type world, where it's just a drawing, I'll just delete those, because I don't want to see them, or let's delete these doors from this view, from this sheet of paper. But in reality, they were deleting three-dimensional information from the model, because in Revit, there is only one model. So that chair is not a drawing of a chair, it's a three-dimensional chair. So just be careful of that when you're in a sheet, that you are actually live in the model when you activate the view. Now what Revit will do, when you are active in that view, it does grey out the sheet, so that hopefully reminds you. Okay, right click on that, deactivate view. So we're back now in the paper space view. Let's just zoom in a bit down here. And what I'm going to do now is position our plan over the top of our rendered view, and then we'll go back into that rendered view and just change its size a little bit. So click on the plan. We could just drag it now. Could just click and drag it, but for a slightly more precise move, we'll use the Move tool, shortcut MV, and that will now allow us to drag from point to point. So we click on that top left corner of the building, zoom in here, position that. It's not quite on, let's just move it again. Okay, that's pretty close. Okay. Now, as you can see, the rendering is not quite the right size. What we can do there, we can actually, let's think, what's the best way of doing this? Yeah, if we activate that view, so we right-click on our rendered image, activate the view, so we're now in our drafting view, and we can scale that image. Now we can scale it by just dragging the corner points if we want, and that's okay, that's normally quite a reasonable way of doing it. Or we can scale it using the scale tool up here. Let's click on that scale tool. We've got options, graphical or numerical. So graphical, you'll just click on points. Numerical, you would type in a scale factor. Let's just do this graphically. So we'll click on our top left corner, click here on that corner of that wall, more or less, drag it across, click again, and it's scaled it. Okay. If we just zoom in a bit, pretty close. I mean, it's not absolutely 100%, but by the time you've put that on a sheet, I don't think you could probably notice those differences. Now, as I say, it is a little bit frustrating that this part of the process is just not live. It's just unlinked from the live model. I'm sure they will change it. In the next session, we're going to have a little look at the lead daylight simulation in Revit, and that is a live way of working, but it's not a daylight factor simulation. Okay, so we've done that. That's looking pretty good. Right click, deactivate view. So we've got that on the sheet. We've got a key. Okay, we'll tidy that up in a moment. Let's just tidy up our title here. So if we click on that title and drag it, we can just place it where we want. Okay, there's our sheet. Now we could very quickly add some more images. So let's go back to image. And oops. Let's just grab an image. Sorry, bear with me a moment. Okay, so we've brought in one of our corresponding views. Let's have another image, that one. Let's position that. Okay, so quite quickly here we're building up a sheet. We're using Revit as the place to insert image files. Obviously you could do that in InDesign. You don't have to do that in Revit. Okay, just a few more quick things. Let's say we've got that view like that, but we want to crop this JPEG. Let's say we want to crop off this black border along the edge. What we can do, if we go back into our drafting view, so if we find our drafting view, this one, there's our drafting view. If we go up to the Annotate tab, Region, sorry, do that again. Annotate. Just going to do that again, I did that wrong. Click on the drop down. Rather than selecting a filled region, click on a masking region. And what this will do now is you can draw a mask and it will just hide anything that's underneath it. The way to start is normally probably use a rectangle, is to first of all draw a rectangle around everything that you want to see. Okay, and I normally get this the wrong way around first time. So draw everything that you want to see, which is that. Then draw a second rectangle around everything that you want to hide, which is all of that. And when you're ready, click the tick to finish the command. And what we've now done is we've just masked that bit of black there. Okay, go back to our sheet. There we are. But the problem we've got now is that we can see our masking line. So we can fix that. If we go back into our drafting view, select your masking region there and go up to Edit Boundary here. That brings you into the sketch editing mode where you could also change the shape of that mask. But if you just select all of your lines in that sketch editing mode, go up to your line style and select invisible lines, not hidden lines. I don't quite know why, but hidden lines in Revit show up. They're kind of a dotted line. It's just the way they've named it. So it's invisible lines is what you want. Then finish the edit mode, and those lines now are invisible. So if we go back into our sheet, there's our view cropped. Okay.